The warehouse is cold enough to hurt, not the kind of cold you feel on a winter street, the kind that gets inside your clothes and stays there, the kind that makes your fingers slow. There's a man kneeling on the concrete floor in front of you. His wrists are zip-tied behind his back. His head is down. A thin line of blood runs from the corner of his mouth and drips onto the floor. You can hear him breathing. Short, controlled breaths, like someone trying to hold themselves together, one inhale at a time. You haven't looked directly at his face yet. You're holding a gun. Dmitri is standing behind you. He hasn't spoken in 4 minutes. He doesn't need to. His silence is doing exactly what he wants it to do, pushing you forward, removing every excuse, making the moment feel inevitable. Your son turned 5 3 weeks ago. You told him you'd be at his party. You weren't. He called you that afternoon and said, "It's okay, Dad. There's cake left." 5 years old, already used to you not being there. 2 years ago, you were a logistics manager at a freight company in St. Petersburg. You scheduled shipments, argued with customs agents, drank bad coffee at your desk and worried about whether you could afford a better apartment before your kids started school. You were ordinary. You were safe. You were someone who could look his son in the eyes without flinching. Now you're standing in a warehouse on the city's edge with a gun in your hand and a man on his knees in front of you. And the only question that matters is what you do in the next 10 seconds. How does a man like you end up here? Go back 2 years. The week Oleg found you, you hadn't slept properly in 4 days. 40 tons of structural steel locked inside a customs facility in Murmansk. The buyer calling every 90 minutes. Your supervisor sending messages at midnight like punctuation marks could fix a logistics crisis. You solved it in one phone call. You knew the right department, the right name, the language that actually moved people versus the language that just made them defensive. The shipment cleared by 3 in the afternoon. Oleg watched the whole thing from a chair in the corner of your office. He'd come in that morning as a representative from a new import account. Routine paperwork. You barely registered him, but after the call, he didn't leave. He sat there for another 20 minutes, watching you work through the next problem on your list. Then he stood, buttoned his coat, and said, "You have a talent most people don't know they have." You told him thanks and went back to your inbox. 7 days later, an envelope appeared on your desk. No return address, just your name in clean handwriting. Inside, 5,000 euros in cash. A card with an address. One line of text. "Come, listen. If you don't like what you hear, keep the money, and you'll never hear from me again." 5,000 euros was 2 months of salary. You told yourself you were just going to listen. The address was a closed restaurant near the waterfront. Old building. No signs. The kind of place that exists in every port city and that nobody talks about. Inside, 4 men sat around a table. Oleg was one. The others you didn't recognize, except for the man in the corner, eating quietly, who you'd seen once in a newspaper photograph attached to a financial investigation that was dropped before it reached trial. You understood immediately what kind of room you were sitting in. You sat down. Anyway, that was the first decision. Not the worst, not the last, but the one that made all the others possible. The man in the corner was named Dmitri. He didn't waste words. He told you what he'd already determined. You knew how to move things without drawing attention. You had contacts in customs, freight agencies, and regulatory offices across 4 countries. You were precise. You were discreet, and you never asked questions you weren't supposed to ask. That last part, he said, is rarer than you think. The offer was simple. Logistics consulting. Coordinate routes. Manage contacts. Resolve complications. He didn't tell you what you'd be moving. You didn't ask. The first payment was 12,000 euros for 3 weeks of work. You sat in your car outside the bank and did the math. 1 year of this and the apartment was paid off. 2 years and your son could go to a real school, study abroad, have options you never had. You told yourself it was temporary. You bought your son a bicycle, the good kind, with real gears, not the plastic one you'd been planning. He rode it up and down the apartment hallway until his mother made him stop. That night, after he fell asleep, you sat at the kitchen table and stared at the money you'd set aside. You could stop, go back to the freight company, pretend the last month hadn't happened. Instead, you called Oleg and said you were ready for the next job. 3 months in, a shipment came through with unusual documentation, numbers that didn't match, weights that were filed wrong in 2 different systems. You rewrote the paperwork trail, smoothed the inconsistencies, made sure nothing surfaced that shouldn't. You still didn't ask what was in the containers. But you weren't stupid. You knew. You just never said it out loud. Not to Oleg, not to yourself, not to the version of you that sat across from your son at dinner and asked about his day. 6 months in, your phone rang at 10:40 at night. Oleg. Tight voice. Container. Shipment in Murmansk. New customs agent on shift. He's not ours. He's pulling documentation and running serial checks. The truck needs to leave in 90 minutes or we lose the window. You drove through the night. The port facility was bright and cold. You found the agent, young guy, maybe 28, name badge said Vasily, in a prefab office reviewing manifests under fluorescent lights. You spent 40 minutes with him. You didn't threaten him. You didn't offer cash. You found out his younger brother ran a small transport company that was one bad quarter from closing. You told him you knew people who needed reliable regional carriers, that a contract like that could change a small business overnight. By the time you left that office, Vasily had cleared the documentation. The truck pulled out with 11 minutes to spare. Walking back across the yard, you passed the container as it was being loaded onto the flatbed. One of the latches had come loose. Through the gap, just a few inches, you saw what was inside. Not steel, not industrial equipment. You closed the gap and kept walking. Behind you, one of Dmitri's men, who'd been stationed at the fence line, gave you a single nod. He'd been watching the whole time, making sure you didn't stop to look, making sure you kept moving. You understood then that this had also been a test. On the drive back, Oleg called. The delivery is clear, good work. A pause. The agent who was originally scheduled for that shift had to be replaced at the last minute. Dmitri wanted you to know that's been handled. Handled. You didn't ask what it meant. You went home. Your son was eating breakfast when you walked in. He looked up and said, "Dad, you look tired." You told him you'd been working. He nodded like that explained everything. You went to the bathroom, turned on the tap, and washed your hands for a long time. 8 months in, Oleg gave you an address and a name. Fedorov, late 30s, construction business owner. He'd borrowed money to cover a contract that collapsed, and he'd been avoiding contact for 3 weeks. Go with Gennady, Oleg said. Have a conversation. Gennady was one of the men who stood near doors at meetings. Big, quiet, the kind of quiet that has a reason. Fedorov's apartment was in the eastern part of the city. He answered the door in a t-shirt, clearly wasn't expecting you, and when he saw Gennady behind you, his face went the color of old concrete. You did the talking. You told him, avoiding people didn't dissolve a debt, that every week it sat unresolved, it cost more, not just financially. You kept your voice level. You didn't touch him, but you made sure he understood that Gennady wasn't standing there for decoration. Fedorov picked up his phone to make a call. Gennady moved. One motion. He crossed the room and hit Fedorov open-handed across the face. Not a punch, a slap, but hard enough to send him into the wall. Fedorov slid down to the floor, holding his face. He started to get up. You stepped in front of him, not to help him, to block the door. Fedorov looked up at you from the floor, blood on his lip, eyes wide, and you held his gaze and didn't move. He made the call. By the end of the week, the money was transferred. On the drive back, Gennady glanced over. You're good at that, he said. At what? Knowing when to step in and when to get out of the way. You didn't answer. That night, you went to your son's school performance. You'd promised. Flowers for his teacher. You stopped at a shop on the way, bought a small bouquet, made it with 4 minutes to spare. Your son saw you walk in, and his face did that thing. The thing that made everything else feel very far away and very close at the same time. He ran to you before the program started and grabbed your hand. You held it and thought about Fedorov on the floor and the way you'd stepped in front of the door. You'd been good at it. That was the part you couldn't stop thinking about. 10 months in, Oleg told you to pack for 4 days. Prague. A negotiation between Dmitri's group and a Ukrainian outfit led by a man named Serhiy. Your role. Technical support. Logistics expertise. Nothing more. The dinner was in a private room above a restaurant in the old quarter. 8 people. 4 from each side. Wine that cost more than your weekly salary. Conversation that said almost nothing directly. During the second course, Serhiy moved to the chair beside you. He started with small talk. Then the questions got specific. Routes, border contacts, container volumes, names. He was subtle, the kind of subtle that takes years, but you caught it on the second question. You gave him nothing. Changed subjects, deflected, circled back. kept him talking about himself until he gave up. At the end of the evening, he set an envelope on the table in front of you. For your collaboration. You looked at it, then at him. I appreciate it, but I don't work that way. You slid it back. The flight home felt long. You were certain you'd made an enemy, that Serhiy would tell Dmitri his own version, and the interpretation would go badly. Instead, Dmitri called you into a private meeting the day you landed. No Oleg, just you and him. He poured 2 glasses of tea. Serhiy tried to buy information from you. Yes. You refused without contacting me first. It happened fast. I made a call. Why did you refuse? Because I already work for someone. Dmitri looked at you for several seconds. Good, he said. That afternoon he gave you a new phone. Encrypted. Direct line. No Oleg in between. What you didn't know, what you wouldn't discover for another year, was that Serhiy worked for Dmitri. Prague wasn't a business trip. It was an audition. And you'd passed without knowing there was a stage. At this point, would you have walked away or taken the money? Tell me in the comments. 13 months in, Dmitri called on a Wednesday morning. There's a man named Volkov. He was moving product for us 6 months ago. He skimmed. We let it go the first time. The second time we warned him. Now he's gone quiet and we believe he's talking to people he shouldn't be talking to. A pause. I need him brought in. Tonight. Brought in, you repeated. You'll have Gennady and 2 others. Your job is to find him, not lose him, and make sure he arrives breathing. Dmitri hung up. You sat in your car for 10 minutes. Then you drove to meet Gennady. Volkov was living in a rented room, above a laundry in the southern district. You found him through a contact who owed you a favor. Same method as always, same language, same precision that had gotten you this far. The 4 of you went in at 11 p.m. Volkov ran. Out the back, through a narrow yard, over a fence. He was fast. Panicked fast, which is faster than most people can manage on purpose. You cut around the building. You knew the street layout. You'd mapped it before you went in. Habit from logistics work, knowing your terrain before the truck arrives. You were waiting at the end of the alley when he came around the corner. He stopped, looked at you, looked at the space behind you. His eyes went through every option in about half a second. Don't, you said. He ran anyway. You tackled him against the wall, got an arm across his shoulders, brought him down hard onto the wet pavement. By the time Gennady arrived, you had Volkov face down with his arm pinned. Nobody said anything on the drive. Volkov was breathing, scared, quiet. You delivered him to a location Oleg texted you and drove home. You never asked what happened to Volkov after that. You already knew. And knowing, and still making that drive, still finding him, still holding him down while Gennady put him in the car. That was the line. You just didn't call it that yet. Your son called you that night to tell you he'd lost his first tooth. You told him to put it under his pillow. He asked if you were coming home soon. You told him yes. You were already home. But some part of you, the part that had been in that alley, wasn't. A year and 2 months in, a problem arrived with a name. Artem, 26, fast, sharp, good instincts. He'd been working low-level jobs for the organization for almost 2 years. The kind of work nobody noticed unless it went wrong. It went wrong. He'd said something at a bar to a woman he trusted. The woman mentioned it to her brother. The brother passed it somewhere it shouldn't have gone. Dmitri called you in. You know the boy. He looks up to you. Talk to him before someone less patient handles it. You found Artem in a parking garage near his apartment. He hadn't slept in days. He was holding himself together with visible effort. You talked for 2 hours. Not to interrogate, to understand exactly what had been said, to whom, how far it had traveled, and what the realistic damage was. Your conclusion? Recoverable. Barely. Recoverable how? Dmitri asked. He disappears for 90 days. No contact with the woman or her brother. The person at the end of the chain has reasons of his own to stay quiet. The story dies. Silence. You're asking me to spare him. I'm offering you the lowest exposure solution. Another pause. All right, but he's yours now. His next mistake belongs to you too. Artem went to a dacha in the countryside. 93 days. No incidents. But something shifted in you during those 93 days. For over a year you'd been telling yourself you were solving logistical problems, that the violence happened somewhere else carried by people like Gennady, and that your role was clean. Vouching for Artem ended that story. Because if he'd slipped up during those 3 months, you knew what would happen. You'd be the one who'd guaranteed him. You'd be part of it. You were already part of it. 3 weeks after Artem came back, he appeared at your door at 7 in the morning. His face was wrong. "I need to tell you something," he said. "About, Prague." You let him in. He sat at your kitchen table and told you he'd been hearing things from someone inside the organization who drank too much and talked when he shouldn't. Prague hadn't been a real negotiation. Serhiy wasn't from a rival group. He worked for Dmitry. The dinner, the questions, the envelope, all of it staged. You sat with that for a moment. Then you started going back through the last 14 months. The Murmansk shipment, the latch that came loose, Dmitry's man at the wall fence who watched to see whether you'd stop and look, Fedorov on the floor and your decision to block the door instead of step aside, Volkov in the alley, Artem, every step, every test you didn't know you were taking. Dmitry hadn't recruited you. He'd engineered you. They'd been watching you for months before the envelope appeared. They knew your finances, your professional contacts, your relationship with your son, your threshold for risk, and, most importantly, your capacity to rationalize. Each small step is not yet crossing a real line. The bicycle you bought your son, the apartment, the encrypted phone, the alley, all of it planned. "Why are you telling me this?" you asked. Artem looked at the table. "Because 2 days ago, Dmitry left a photograph on his desk when I came in for a meeting. He didn't mention it. He just let me see it." "What photograph?" Artem looked up. "Your son, outside his school." The kitchen was completely quiet. "He wanted to know if I'd tell you," Artem said. "Which means he already knew I would. Which means this is another test," you said, "or a warning, or both." Your phone buzzed on the table. Oleg's number. "Dmitry wants to see you tonight," Oleg said when you picked up. "Bring the boy." The line went dead. You looked at Artem. "Go to your place," and you said, "Stay inside. Don't open the door for anyone." He nodded. You could see in his face that he understood something you weren't saying out loud, that you weren't sure you could protect him, that you weren't sure you could protect yourself. You drove to the address alone. You'd decided on the way that you would go in, hear what Dmitry wanted, and find a way to keep Artem out of it. You had leverage. You'd built goodwill. There had to be a version of this where you used what you'd accumulated to protect him. That was what you told yourself. The warehouse was on the industrial edge of the city. You pulled in, and 2 of Dmitry's men met you at the door. They checked you, took your phone, and walked you inside. Dmitry was standing in the center of the space. Gennady was there, 2 other men you recognized, and then, headlights through the side door. A car pulled in. Gennady walked to it and opened the rear door. Artem stumbled out, wrists bound, head down, a cut above his eye that hadn't been there this morning. He hadn't stayed at the apartment. And this landed cold and clear, Dmitry had sent someone before your conversation even ended, had known you'd warn Artem, had moved to collect him before you'd even decided what to do. Artem raised his eyes and found yours. His expression wasn't accusatory. That was almost worse. Dmitry spoke from behind you. "He talked to the wrong people again," he said. You vouched for him. You remembered exactly what Dmitry had said 14 months ago. His next mistake belongs to you too. Gennady moved Artem to the center of the floor and put him on his knees. Dmitry walked around until he was standing beside you. He held out a gun, not dramatically, not like a moment in a film, just held it out, handle first, the way you'd hand someone a tool they needed to finish a job. "You brought him into this," Dmitry said. "You finish it. You took the gun. You don't know exactly why." Reflex. The same instinct that had been moving you forward for 2 years without ever letting you see the whole distance. You looked at Artem. He looked at you. He said one word, very quiet. "Don't," not begging. He already knew how the night ended. He was saying it for you. You thought about your son, his face at the school performance, the way he grabbed your hand before the program started, the cake he saved for you, 5 years old and already learning to expect less. You thought about the alley, Volkov's arm pinned under yours, the drive home, the tooth under the pillow. You thought about every moment you told yourself one more step wouldn't change you. The gun was heavy in your hand, and you pulled the trigger. The sound was enormous in the empty space. Then it was very quiet. Dmitry took the gun back, said nothing, nodded once to Gennady. You walked to your car. You drove home. You opened your front door at 2 in the morning. Your son was supposed to be at his mother's that week. He wasn't. He was asleep on the couch in front of a cartoon he'd paused, waiting for you. He woke up when the door closed. Squinted at you. Dad? Hey, you're late. I know. I'm sorry. He sat up and reached his arms out, the way he still did, even at 5, even when he was half asleep. And you went to him and held him. You put your hand on the back of his head. He smelled like shampoo and sleep. You stayed like that for a long time. He didn't ask where you'd been. He didn't ask why your hands were cold. He just held on. And you let him believe that the person holding him back was still the person he thought you were. That was the last thing the Bratva took. Not your freedom, not your future, not even your choices. Those had been going for a while. Just that. The ability to hold your son and be honest, even in silence, about who you are. In the weeks that followed, life looked almost normal from the outside. Payments came through. Dmitry treated you with the particular calm respect he reserved for people who had proven themselves completely. New assignments arrived. More complex. More personal. The kind that used to go to men like Gennady. You handled them. You got good at the things you'd spent 2 years watching other people do. You bought your son new shoes. Took him to a football game. Sat in the stands in the cold and watched him eat a hot dog and explained the rules to you like you'd never seen the sport before. You laughed. You meant it. And somewhere in the middle of that afternoon you understood what the cage actually was. It wasn't fear of Dmitry. It wasn't the money. It wasn't even the photograph of your son outside his school. It was the fact that you had become someone who could do what you did in that warehouse and still sit in these stands, still laugh at this joke, still put your arm around this kid and feel genuine warmth. The cage was the distance between who you were at 2 in the morning and who you were at 3 in the afternoon, and the distance kept growing, and you kept fitting yourself into both spaces without breaking. That's what the Bratva built. Not a prisoner, a man who no longer needed the bars to stay inside. When do you think you crossed the line? The envelope? The night you blocked Fedorov's door? The alley with Volkov? The moment you took responsibility for Artem and then held the gun anyway? Or was there never one line? Just a road and a choice to keep walking? Tell me in the comments. If this story held you from beginning to end, subscribe. Every week you'll live a different life, inside a world most people never see from this side. And if you want to keep going right now, the next video is on your screen. The next story starts where this one ends.